From the national election of 2024 to Detroit's upcoming 2025 local elections, what lessons about media, understanding, and listening should our community carry forward?
So I'm going to tell you why I reframed the question. I reframed the question because I live in District 7. And if people know about the city council districts, District 7 is the largest physical area that's encapsulated in a district. Physically, we have the highest number of teenagers. We also have the lowest voter turnout rate.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I know these things because I'm active in my community. I have a block club. And just through speaking with neighbors, listening to people, shouts out to Mama Theo, the Hood Research Fam that's part of District 7. And, I live in Bart McFarland. And I'm saying all that to say those things are very important because the information that I'm sharing comes from real sources, meaning people that have lived in the community for over 50 years and have worked in the community. So listening to people and the people having been divested from, it's really important to be sensitive to the fact that people are actively and intentionally not participating in the electoral process, not because they don't believe in their own power, not because they're stupid or ignorant, which is what the media would teach you, but because in practice, they have been aggressed upon in a way to where it's ineffective for them to even go participate because they had to suffer from something called the emergency management. And what happened in Detroit, if you don't know anything about emergency management, in short, is financial martial law. And what happened during the so-called economic crisis that happened, I say so-called because all economic crises and all crises and political crises are manufactured. But but with that, on the so-called economic crisis that happened, different cities, different states received what was called an emergency management. We know the devastation of the impact of emergency management on a federal scale because we have all witnessed, experienced, and seen the horrors of the Flint water crisis. And so that is the impact of what happens when decisions that impact people are bottom lined. And so living in a community that that was very heavily impacted by the emergency management situation where our city officials had their decisions bottom line. So basically what happened, you voted, right? So you would vote for this person. This person technically sits in a seat, but the decisions that they were put in place to make, they're not even empowered to make because there's another person that's called an emergency manager that has been put in place to actually override those decisions and make the decisions of the federal government. So that's important to understand because when we talk about democracy, we talk about power, that's the people's power actually being taken away from them. And so when we blame citizens and say, well, you don't vote, but we hear people say back to us, well, it don't matter what them people do because they're going to do what they're going to do anyway. They're not wrong. And when we go to them and we have fake candidates or candidates that don't represent us or candidates who don't know anything about us or candidates who are supposed to be from the community but play the role of the enemy because they do the bidding of the enemy, then they're not only class enemies, they're like just basic enemies to our very existence. And so, yeah, it doesn't matter. They're right. It doesn't matter when they vote because the people are going to do what they're going to do anyway. So how do we then try to lie to them and tell them that it's important for them to vote because our ancestors died for that right? But their ancestors didn't die for them to be able to put somebody in there that doesn't care about them. Right. So anyway, I went into that because it's very important to understand the community that I live in because my community is very demonized because it's a very high poverty community. And still it's a very there's a lot of people that live there. Right. There's like 11,000 people that live in what I will call my community. And so those people live there. There is many of them are fathers around 50 years old that have children. There's many and they're active fathers. There's a whole thing around like war against like, black people don't take care of their kids. I see so many people taking care of their kids all over the place on my block and around my neighborhood. So I think I'm just setting the stage for like what type of community I live in. So when we talk about like the politics, I just want to do that reframe about elections and just talk about what are the broader lessons that we can learn about media literacy and critical thinking, and how we can ensure that Black Detroiters are equipped to analyze media messages, identify bias, and form their own informed opinions, right? Regardless of the political landscape. And people need to be able to spot misinformation, narratives that are designed to keep us divided and disempowered, and also to remember how mainstream media portrays Detroiters, right? Because they portray us in a very disparaging light, right? They paint us as irresponsible, deserving of punishment, instead of acknowledging the systemic issues that led to the problems, that exist. And it's just important for us to analyze those messages and the deeper agendas at play.
In what ways have you witnessed our community grow more conscious of how intentional communication can foster unity and collective progress?
So here I want to highlight the part where you talk about intentional communication. So I think intentional communication is crucial for building unity and collective power. So we've seen how media narratives can divide communities, right? And, we've also witnessed the power of storytelling and authentic communication to bring people together. So first I want to talk about the division part, right? So the media, mainstream media generally, whether it's the news that's always focused on what we call so-called crime, although I don't believe in the word crime, but I would say, on average, most outlets that display Detroiters or the average Detroiter or the messages that come through about Black Detroiters are focused heavily, hyper focused on this idea of crime and positioning people, citizens, residents, Detroiters, people that live in poverty or live below the poverty level or that live in lower middle class or even middle class as criminals. And those messages are very harmful because it becomes internalized. And people, Black people, Detroiters, mothers, grandmothers, people on the block start to look at one another, their neighbors, the people down the street, the people that live around them as enemies, as people to be feared, as people who are out to get them, and as though they're unsafe. And this is what leads to decisions that community members begin to adopt around wanting to, as I've experienced in a community meeting, ask for the National Guard to come in because they're afraid of a group of young men. Now, when I remember going to a community meeting and the elders were saying that when they see a group of young people, teenagers, they immediately think they want to call the police. And my thing is, like I just told you, I live in one of the most heavily divested from communities in the city. We experienced through emergency management something that was called right sizing. And the right sizing plan, which was instituted through the previous mayor, Dave Bing, I think it was an NBA player, right? And the concept of right sizing was that because this is the narrative, they say because Detroit had lost population, these are their words, not mine, that they needed to make Detroit the right size. And so what that meant was they created what they called healthy neighborhoods. So they created 9 healthy neighborhoods, and all the rest of the neighborhoods they said were unhealthy and undeserving of resources. So that means that only those 9 neighborhoods would be sanctioned to receive any sort of resources, basic resources, That means streetlights, access to community, access to emergency services, cleaning the streets. They closed down all the community centers. They shut off was 100,000 people's water. They were putting people out of their homes. Over 250,000 people were foreclosed upon, and on and on. So all the ways in which a community, the reasons you would move. Oh, and over 250 schools closed. So any reason that one would have to move to a neighborhood was removed. That means that the businesses then had to leave. And so they intentionally destroyed these neighborhoods. Now, like I told you, most of the people that could leave left. So that leaves these neighborhoods with people who can't sell their house and who can't leave because they're not going to get enough money to move to another place. And they're not going to be able to afford to, survive if they move someplace else. And many people were on fixed income or no income, right? And so, you're looking at a population that was basically aggressed upon by its own government, right? Eaten by its own government, its own local government made up of people who are from the same neighborhoods and who look like them, right? So why do I continue to harp on these points? Because these are the points that are the real media points. Not that your neighbor is not, the average neighbor is not some scary Bigfoot that's going to come hurt you. And that's the truth. And I'm saying that from a position of living in what would scientifically be called a block that's hot, right? And what I mean by that is there's so much divestment that people are trying to get it. They need to get it, right? And in those type of situations, it's not looking at your neighbor like they're your enemy and someone that you need to fear, but it's someone that you need to survive with. So those are relationships that need to be created. Those are people that need to be understood. Those are people that are, if they're a stranger, y'all share a community, like y'all need each other. So y'all need to be trying to figure out who y'all are and how y'all can live together and work together. So those are very scary ideas because the media is teaching you that you got to be afraid of these people. But me, like I said, I have my block club. I go up and down my block and share resources with my neighbors. I learn who they are. I'm learning about what they do. And just learning how I can support them and how I can plug them into the things that I'm plugged into if they're interested, and learning how I can support the things that they got going on. And that's called building a real relationship. And it's not looking at the newspaper trying to figure out who your neighbor is and then labeling that person based on some white supremacist construct of what a Black person is supposed to be. Now, on the converse level, and when we talk about what communities can do, I think about a project like Mapping the Water Crisis. And if you spoke about We the People of Detroit before, Mapping the Water Crisis is a participatory research project that the organization We the People of Detroit created through the work that they were doing to restore people's water. And what they did is they worked with Wayne State University and youth and different people in the community and teaching them how to do things like research and mapping. And what they did was actually map through interviews, conversations, and research the impact of water shutoffs on community. And what they learned through that research was the same places that I just named in the right sizing, the same zip codes and the same communities that were having their water shut off was the same ones that was being foreclosed upon, which the same ones where they were turning off the street lights, the access to emergency services, the street cleaning, and the schools. And they put color coding to it and they mapped it. And what's powerful about that is because these same people that are described in mainstream media as being incapable of understanding politics did a really important political project that they created themselves and disseminated themselves and packaged themselves. And if you go on the We the People of Detroit website, not only will you see that, they've done a new one that just came out like 3 weeks ago, shameless plug. And that one is called Toxic Water, Toxic System. And it's exposing the consequences and doing the research of the connections between the Flint and Detroit water crisis and how that was orchestrated and created. Shouts out to the devils that destroyed and murdered an entire city that is still under siege. And 10 years later has to live on bottled water to survive, right? And who is being blamed still currently? They're blaming the mayor, who wasn't even a mayor at the time. And the federal government hasn't given them their reparations. And we all know that Governor Snyder, got convicted, conviction overturned. And these are the messages that we ourselves know that happen and live through. And these are the messages that we need to cut through with outlets like Detroit is Different, which is where we get our messages across, because we know that we're not going to see them in other outlets.
Which actually goes into the next question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you keep your finger on the pulse of local information, needs and concerns, ensuring that you remain tuned in to communities' evolving issues, as it's a lot that you're staying on the pulse of?
Well, number one, like I said, you have to go back to having a real relationship. That's like being I hate to make it so mundane, but like if you're in a relationship with somebody, right? That's like being going on social media to find out about the person. You ain't in a real relationship if you go on social media to find out what's going on with this person. You got to be in their face and have a conversation with that person. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing as it is with what's going on in the community. There are organizations that are on the ground that are doing real work. So either you're in relationship with those organizations, or you're learning from the publications that those organizations put out, or you know somebody that's in the organization, but you got to be invested and involved in your community to actually have a pulse. Because like I said, media is a business. Media, the corporate media is a corporation. And at the end of the day, information is to be bought and sold in the corporate arena. And so it doesn't, those outlets aren't even held to the standards anymore of having to tell the truth. Okay. So it's up to us, right? And so We the People of Detroit is putting out these books and these sort of very detailed and put together packaged examples of research that they've done in the community. Detroit is Different, and I'm gonna always shout out Detroit is Different for having consistent podcasts that are on YouTube and other outlets. Riverwise Magazine puts on a printed magazine. I believe it's maybe monthly or so. Mm-hmm. And, those are great stories that are written by community members, that are by people that are in community, that are involved in these organizations, that are sharing the information that they're working on as they're working on it and talking to the people that are doing these things. So it's firsthand accounts, right? I want to shout out People's Platform, because People's Platform has an amazing newspaper. They also do a lot of political education in the community. They also bring people to learn how to speak in public comment. They also put out something. They have a racial equity tool where they teach community members how to, they have something called the Community Benefits Agreement, and they help communities be able to understand when these corporations, you just spoke to it earlier, I think you did, when we talked about the ways in which these corporations want to come into communities and not have to pay their fair share. Why? With the Pizzarina, that's what we call the Little Caesars Arena with the Illiches, right? So if y'all remember that fight that we were in, we tried to block that project. And people like, y'all don't want the Pistons to come to Detroit? Well, this is the thing. We don't want billionaires to get tax breaks out of the pockets of the schools, because that's what happened. The 1/3 of the school money that was supposed to go to the schools, the same schools where at the same exact time in the same exact headlines where they're blaming citizens from being too stupid to know what's good for them, to want to bring the Pistons back, which is a narrative that they didn't put the narrative that what the problem is that we are fighting against is that the Pizzarina wanted wanted the city council to agree to use the school money to pay for the project. While the schools had black mold, while they couldn't pay the teachers, while they don't have books, while they don't have a sufficient education system. So no, we don't want billionaires to get tax breaks. We want those tax breaks to go back into the city. Because why should a billionaire not have to pay taxes while it's a different institution, but represent the city as well? While Detroit Water and Sewage Department could rain down on your grandma for $150 for owing her water bill, and if she's taking care of the kids, snatch the kids out of the home, and then accuse her of neglect and abuse and put them in juvenile detention. So how is that correct over, making DTE pay their tens or $20,000 of water bills in arrears? So these are the ways in which, our media outlets, the ones that we want to support, can get these messages out. You know what I'm saying?